Hello, class. We're now looking at chapter 4 on genre, or basically types. That's the French word for types. Types of productions, types of entertainment. So the two basic types are tragedy and comedy. So let's start with ancient tragedy. And in the old days, there was, they're kind of restrictive in the old days. I think, things had to be done a certain way. So basically, they figured that for ancient tragedy, you can't do tragedy about common people. They have to be royal. They have to be rich and important. So also, you couldn't just talk normally. You had to speak in poetic verse. And so those were two big strictures, and eventually that went all the way through the Renaissance and then until the modern age. So Aristotle, who is a famous cataloger, he was a scientist too. You'd know Aristotle if you talked about logic or you talked about science, and he cataloged things. He was a cataloger, and he basically, after the golden age of Greece, because really that was about 500 to 400 BC, and then around 300 BC, he really looked at all the great work from that golden age of the playwrights to catalog what they did. And so he made these rules, sort of, about looking at a play like Oedipus. And one of the things he thought was that there had to be some kind of tragic irretrievability, so that once the ball gets rolling, you can't really stop. There's an inevitability about your life. Once you make certain decisions, then that's going to lead, basically it's going to lead to tragedy. And so once you're down that hill, at some point you're trying to fight that fate, but then at some point you just have to accept it. So you have to have acceptance. Now the audience is going to follow along, and they're going to see this, and they're going to feel sorry for it and afraid of what's going to happen. So there's got to be fear and pity involved. And then at the end, maybe some kind of a catharsis or an emotional relief. It's like when you cry at a sad movie. That's catharsis. So to have that kind of feeling. And so a good tragedy you'd feel sorry for the person, like in Hamlet. Hamlet dies at the end. He's trying to, get his throne back, and he's angry at his uncle who's usurped the throne, and his mother who's married his uncle, and he's basically trying to get things right again. And so hopefully you feel sorry for Hamlet at the end once he dies. That kind of a thing. And even in Oedipus, we saw a clip from the Lego version of Oedipus in the last chapter. Hopefully you may feel sorry for Oedipus, because basically he was just a pawn of fate. Yeah, he had some problems. He was kind of a proud person and everything, but that was the hand he was dealt with. He was going to kill his father and marry his mother. And then he realized, the horror of that when he did that, so hopefully you felt sorry for the person. But a lot of times, even the darkest of tragedies end with some kind of affirmation. At the end of Hamlet, after everybody dies, then Fortinbras comes in with his army and basically brushes aside these cobwebs of all this corruption, and then a new world order starts. And at the end of Oedipus, basically there had been a plague in Thebes. That was the problem. That's why everybody was complaining. Help us fix this plague. And they found at the root of the plague was this awful secret that Oedipus had. And so once that was rooted out, then the plague was lifted. At the end, the plague was lifted. So again, there is some kind of, even in the darkest of plays, sometimes there can be an affirmation. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And then modern day tragedy, basically it follows the same kind of rule, death of a salesman. Well, when you read the title of it, how that's going to end. So people die in this Gran Torino and $1 Million Baby, some Clint Eastwood. You know, Clint Eastwood's had quite a career, by the way. You know, started out doing TV and basically became this kind of John Wayne type character, and then turned into a great movie director who's got a fabulous catalog of stories. He has a great eye for a story, by the way. But all of these modern tragedies end with a death. And they're about everyday people, and they've got everyday speech, and so they're just normal people. So we look at that because basically anybody's life can be tragic. So let's take a little look at the clip of Gran Torino. That's in Clint Eastwood's catalog, and I know it's been a few years, but it's still a good movie, and you should check it out. Again, Clint Eastwood tells a good story, so I think you really can't go wrong with any of his movies. Here's a trailer, I think, from Gran Torino. Well, let me look at this here. Let's see. There we go. All right.
Come here, girl.
Stop! Go!
What you looking at, old man?
Never knows how you come across somebody once in a while you shouldn't have messed with. That's me.
You crazy, man. Get out of here, man.
And you worked hard your whole life.
Maybe it's time you started thinking about taking it easier. These places are nothing like what you think they are. They're great.
You know, as I on his birthday, I told you this was a bad idea. What the hell these Chinese have to move in this neighborhood for?
So basically, he plays a grumpy old man who's in this neighborhood, and the neighborhood's starting to evolve, and he's got kind of you know, stereotypical attitudes about the foreign people moving in. But gradually, over the course of the film, he understands these are just hardworking people who are also getting harassed by these gang members, and then he basically changes and tries to defend them. And he also finds out that he is dying of cancer. So his life, he already knows he's going to die. So he makes this sacrificial move at the end. He gets to know this family. They're a wonderful family. They're just hardworking Thai people. And so his attitudes change. So it's a wonderful thing to see a crusty old, you know, typical American who's like, you know, resistant about new change and you know, foreigners get that transition. So what a place to go with this.
I didn't save anybody.
You're a hero to the neighborhood.
I'm not a hero.
We're having barbecue. You want to come over? We've got beer too.
I might as well drink with strangers. Those guys were here the other night. What about them?
Just a game.
Here's the deal. You stay with me because we have to come back here again. It's going to be ugly.
What was it like to kill Matt?
You don't want to know. Tao and Sue are never going to find peace in this world as long as that gang's around.
What are you gonna do, Walt?
Whatever it is, they won't have a chance.
So basically, he sets up a final confrontation with the gang, and he knows he's going to lose his life, but he's also going to get rid of them, and the police will come and take care of that and clean that gang out so that this family can live in peace. So it's a wonderful. It's a wonderful modern tragedy, and you do feel some sorrow and pity for him, but it's got an affirmation at the end, and it's that this other family is going to live in peace. Okay, so again, basically heroic drama and domestic drama, they're all versions of tragedies. There's little subcategories. John Q, I don't know if you're familiar with that, with the Denzel Washington movie. His son is dying, and the hospital, he can't afford the bill, so he holds the hospital hostage and has a hostage situation and gets the public on his favor. So it's really about fighting for you know, medical rights. And Cyrano de Bergerac's a very famous romantic swashbuckling tale about a guy who's got a big nose and he's in love with this girl, and he's very brilliant and very accomplished as a writer, but she's in love with this kind of goofy, good-looking guy. And then so Cyrano writes these poems, and the very end, as he's dying on his deathbed, the lady finds out that he's the one who's been writing these love poems to her all this time, that he really loved her. So that's kind of a heroic drama. It's got an optimistic end because, you know, she finds the love, but even though he dies. The Sopranos, a modern tragedy, just about this family of, you know, middle-class people who happen to be gangsters. You know, he's running a business and also a criminal organization at the same time. So these are other genres. They're all serious. And there's, you know, there's always elements of humor too inside it, but domestic drama. So a domestic drama, if it's sad, it's a modern tragedy. If it's happy, it's a heroic drama. So heroic dramas definitely have optimistic endings. Modern tragedies don't. So you'll see an example of one, I believe, in this module, and you'll make up your mind about that. Then we come to comedy. Everybody loves the comedy, you know, because it makes us laugh, and we want to laugh. We want to enjoy ourselves. Here's 3 good comedies. These are, again, from an older catalog. Mrs. Doubtfire, again, but there are a lot of classics where Robin Williams has to dress up as a woman to have the custodial rights to see his kids. So he basically dresses up as a nanny so that he can be with his kids. Wedding Crashers, about these 2 guys bumping into weddings and refuse to get married. Of course, they all get married at the end. And then this wonderful James Carrey movie where he basically plays this crazy character. All right, so here's a clip from Mrs. Doubtfire, example of comedy. Now, again, in comedy, natural laws don't exist, or they basically get bent and stretched beyond shape. In the first module, you saw a comedy. I believe it was Family 2.0, and that wasn't a natural situation because this guy comes into this family and wants to change his life. That doesn't happen normally. So then you have the outlines of comedy, and then you have the contrast between individuals and society. And again, that guy is a little different than most people are, because most people, you know, even though they may be tired about their life, they put up with it, you know. And the comic premise, what's the setup? Well, the setup in that one is this guy walks into a house that he's never been to before and wants to change his life. In the Wedding Crashers, it's these guys are normal, but they crash a lot of weddings and they get off on it. And Mrs. Doubtfire, well, it's this guy, you know, dresses up as a woman. So, you know, things like that. And in the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask, you know, he has this guy's mask has magical properties. So that's the premise. That's the setup. And that's what, if you're pitching a movie into a film studio and say, hey, I've got this great idea. Let's do this movie about this guy who finds this magic mask that makes him you know, turns into this crazy superhero guy. And the guy's like, well, yeah, sure, I'll give you $5 million to produce that. So if you have a good premise, a movie will get produced. So here's a little clip from Mrs. Doubtfire. Let's take a look.
Put your face on.
Hey.
Easy. Come on. Hey.
And then the comedy, of course, there is that he's a guy, so he doesn't know how to cook, you know, which again, that's kind of sexist in a way, in a reverse way.
Oh my God, it's clouded. Oh God. This holiday smells like burnt rubber. God, it's hot in here.
Oh my, that scene always makes me laugh. Okay, let's see where we at. Boom, boom. Okay, so that was a comedy. So that's a comedy, you know, comic, lots of fun stuff. So there's different types of comic. There's farce, which you just saw, Robin Williams. That's pretty farcical because that's an unusual situation, extreme situation, but still grounded in reality, but just an extreme situation. Then you have satire, which is making fun of people. There was a classic one of, I think, the Sarah Palin and Hillary Clinton, you know, duo for Saturday Night Live. You saw Everybody Loves Raymond already, the domestic comedy. That was in the earlier chapter. I showed you that. We've got Comedy of Manners. We've got Burlesque. I've got a couple of clips here I've got to show you. I don't know if you've seen I Love Lucy. You've got to have I Love Lucy. You've got to know who I Love Lucy was if you haven't seen. She's an iconic comedian from the 50s. And I think I'm old enough that I was, they were actually doing episodes of her when I was just a little kiddie years and years ago. But I've got to play you a clip of another farcical clip from I Love Lucy. I'll do a little short one of SNL and then one of Comedy of Manners. So here's one from, this is a famous, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, here we go. The Candy Factory, where you know, Lucy has her best buddy Ethel, who's on the left on your screen here, and they're trying to make extra money, so they go to this candy factory. And notice this is the 50s, and the props are all very rudimentary. It's all very simple TV, but so they get assigned to put candy together, so that everything always happens. It's always very physical, and stuff always goes wrong. I don't know if you haven't seen this scene. It's great.
Last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired. Listen. Oh!
The acting was pretty bad too, wasn't it?
Well, this is easier. Yeah, we can handle it, okay?
This was also done with a live studio audience, and so that's a real audience, and they're laughing. It's pretty hilarious.
Listen, Ethel, I think you're... Fine, you're doing splendidly. Speed up!
All right, yes, that's a classic forever. Oh, not that one.
Either. Oh, my goodness.
Uh-oh.
Now, this is...
Nope, we don't want that. Let's go this way. Okay. Yes, that's a classic for the ages. It's still funny. And again, she loved doing physical comedy. She's a very smart woman. And she just made a great career. She started out in films and had a great career. This is iconic. So then SNL, Saturday Night Live, you know, it still managed to be relevant all throughout the years it's been around for, oh gosh, I mean, at least the 70s. But it's basically just making fun. And, you know, in our country, we can get away with making fun of our political leaders, but in some countries, you know, you can't. People will get thrown in jail for making fun of the leaders. So, you know, that's one thing about our country. We do have that freedom. And, you know, no matter what your politics are, it's still kind of funny to see because pretty much you know, there's always something funny going on in you know, in politics and then in relationships and stuff and in life. So, but SNL usually always starts with a cold open, I guess, is something that's usually from the daily life. So here's a clip, I think, of Brad Pitt playing Anthony Fauci. So here is, I think that because there was a joke about somebody, because Anthony Fauci got famous in the pandemic. Everybody said, you know, Brad Pitt should play you. That was kind of a joke. So Brad Pitt does.
Lead members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Anthony Fauci. First, I'd like to thank all the older women in America who have sent me supportive, inspiring, and sometimes graphic emails. Now, there's been a lot of misinformation out there about the virus. And yes, the president has taken some liberties with our guidelines. So tonight, I would like to explain what the president was trying to say. And remember, let's all keep an open mind.
We had a great meeting today with a lot of the great companies, and they're going to have vaccines, I think, relatively soon.
Relatively soon is an interesting phrase. Relative to the entire history of Earth, sure, the vaccine's going to come real fast. But if you were to tell a friend, I'll be over relatively soon, and then showed up a year and a half later, well, your friend may be relatively pissed off.
Right. So you get the point here. Okay. So yes, that's comedy, making fun. And then obviously we have the domestic comedy, domestic situation. And the comedy of manners is kind of, now the comedy of manners really kind of started in the Renaissance. I'm thinking like the 1600s, especially like in Western society anyway, like in England. Basically, it was manners because who was going to the theater and who could afford the theater in those days? It was the rich people. In the 1600s, after they closed the theaters down, and Cromwell closed the theaters down, and there was a period of about 40 years where the theater was closed, and then the Restoration in about 1650 or so came back, and it became theater of the rich people. So people were making fun of the rich people, because comedies were people making fun of them, and that was the mannered comedies. But you know, comedy manners could be anybody's manners. You know, if you're was the Duck Dynasty was very popular, and that's kind of a comedy of manners too, because these people are the opposite of, you know, rich people. These are just, you know, real down to earth people, and maybe there's comedy in that kind of a situation too. So any kind of a particular group, you could have comedy of manners. But this is I'm going to show you a clip of this modern film version of sort of that kind of period of that you know, 1700s. You know, these kind of foppish rich people, and all these people, they don't have jobs. You know, it's like in Downton. If you watch Downton Abbey, you know, they're rich. Basically, they just watch a farm or something that everybody's making money for them. So they're not the working class. In fact, to be having a job like a lawyer or a physician is you know, that's a step down, because you actually have to work for a living. These people get all their money from, you know, inheritances and in their holdings. So basically, all of it, it's all a series of parties and meetings and gossips and teas and breakfasts and stuff. You never see them actually working. Sometimes they'll go to a farm or something and then oversee somebody working, but that's about it. Anyway, so here's a trailer for Love and Friendship. It was a very, very clever and cute update on that kind of old style comedy of manners. So you'll get an idea of the humor involved in these silly people, and they're basically scheming to either get married, get some money, get somebody's inheritance, or whatever. So here's a clip from that.
Seems Lady Susan will finally visit. Lady Susan Vernon.
That woman's a fiend.
Congratulations on being about to receive the most accomplished flirt in all England.
Excuse me for arriving this way. What a delightful family pose. Mrs. Crofts, now come with me as my companion to pack and unpack. Now there's no friendship involved. I'm sure the paying of wages would be offensive to us both.
earn one's plight, they say. It's one's opportunity. Sir James might. Vastly rich, rather simple.
How jolly. Tiny green balls. What are they called? Peas.
If my daughter were not the greatest simpleton on earth, she'd be engaged to him now.
But, Mama, I can see Sir James is a kind man. But marriage is for one's whole life.
To my experience. May I present Lady Susan?
Delighted to make your acquaintance.
He's handsome, isn't he? In a calf-like way.
Mannering's in town.
Have you seen my husband? Horrid woman. Deranged. If she were going to be jealous, she should not have married such a charming man. Does this woman always get her way?
She has an uncanny understanding of men's natures.
I can't help fear that Lady Susan Byrne would destroy every comfort of our lives.
With pleasure. How ungentle.
I'm enjoying Sir James's visit to church. Churchill, that's how you say it, all together like that. I'd heard church and hill, but couldn't find either. All I could see was this big house.
Okay, well, you get the idea. All right, so yes, making fun of these foppish rich people scheming, and it's really, it can be amusing. Okay, what do we have? We have melodrama, and you know, melodrama comes from the 1800s, and basically it's popular entertainment. If you think about really a modern action, comic book action movie nowadays, that's melodrama. You've got heroes, you've got villains, you know who they are. There's the evil plotting people, there's the the big stand-up heroes. There's a series of episodes, there's lots of built-in fights and climaxes, and that builds to basically some kind of a big payoff at the very end. Again, that goes back to the dramatic structure we talked about in chapter 3, I believe. Yes. And there's always music underscoring. Anything you watch on TV, notice how much music there is. Very rarely do you have a play or movie, or a TV show that does not have some underlying music. Basically, it tells us how to think, how we think. So, melodrama started with a whole Snidely Whiplash type of entertainment, you must pay the rent, that kind of thing. But basically, melodrama is any kind of a situation where, you've got heroes and villains and they're clear cut, Now, you can make them more subtle too, that happens too, where the line is drawn, like the film noir in film, where everything's kind of shady. You've got corrupt policemen, and you've got the heroes has dark alcohol problem, or that kind of stuff, trouble at home and stuff. So maybe they're not quite so clear cut, and that would be the difference between just melodrama and like a regular drama. So would be excuse me, a question of the degree of their the amount of black and white. If it really gets gray, then it becomes less melodrama and more real, because that's basically real life is there are shades of gray. We all have we're not black and white. We have all these various shades within us. So that's basically what melodrama is, and I'm just going to go on from there. And then the last category is tragic comedy, which is basically also could be a dramedy, basically combining tragedy and comedy together. And again, they didn't mix that in the old days in Greek times, but they started to, like in Shakespearean times and Renaissance. Here's a clip. This is the nurse from Romeo and Juliet. The nurse is kind of comic relief, or the grave digger in Hamlet. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew you well. So parts of that involved in Shakespeare, some comic characters in the midst of a tragedy. So in modern, we have a lot more tragic comedy, a lot more dramedies, a lot more combinations. You'll see like the medical dramas where there's always something going on, serious, lives are in danger, but there's usually maybe there's a comic subplot or a parallel plot involved in that too. So we're a lot more accustomed to seeing a mix between drama and and comedy in our everyday life. The Coen brothers films, for instance, a lot of their films are kind of quirky characters. There's kind of these sad stories, but there are always these kind of loser characters or things that are kind of amusing. So just trying to play play it from both ends. Here's a clip of, in a modern world, Waiting for Godot is a very famous play on the same level as like really Hamlet or Oedipus Rex, or representative of its period. This is a period of absurdism that came about after World War II in the modern world, and really it's this kind of universe that's kind of barren. And notice the play takes place in this landscape. There's built like barren, so it's bombed out. For instance, like the story of Ela or Mad Max series, any kind of a movie that you've seen that takes place in this barren post-nuclear Holocaust world. That's kind of where Waiting Godot takes place, in this kind of barren world where these two bums, usually they have their clothes on. That's just one version of it. But they're waiting for Godot, or in French that means little god. So they're waiting for God to show up, and God hasn't shown up yet. At the very end of the play, nothing really happens except they just banter and have this kind of relationship. That's really what the play's about. It's about, what's life about? Well, we're just kind of waiting for the end. We're waiting for something to happen. And a lot of times when people saw the play, they didn't understand it when it first came out. But then people got it. I think the text talks about how they play this play in a prison, where that's what people's days are like. And they understood it. They got it, because that's what life is like there. In a way, we're all kind of like that. And so anyway, I'll play you a clip. There's humor in that as well. Even though there's two bums, they have kind of each other. And here's a clip. I think Ian McKellen and, I'm not sure, so Ian McKellen and, I'm not sure the English actor, but another famous, maybe the Picard guy, the guy who plays Picard on the Star Trek series, is doing that. Patrick, I'm not sure his last name is, but let me pull this up for you.
Say, I am happy.
Patrick Stewart.
So am I, so am I. We are happy, we are happy. What do we do now that we're happy?
So you can see, even though it's this grim, bombed out world, they're still having fun. What do they have? Well, they have each other. They're stuck with each other, You
should have been a poet. Oh, I was, isn't that obvious? Ah, exactly. How does it fit me? How would I know? Well, that passed the time. It would have passed in any case.
Okay, so you can see that life is absurd. That's basically what Beckett is saying here. Life is absurd. All we've got is we're just passing the time. We're doing our things. We get up in the morning, go to work, go to bed, maybe watch a show, go to bed, that kind of a thing. And life is tragic, but it's comic, so it's kind of pushing both ways. And it's a little absurd. So on that note, we are done with chapter 4, and then we'll go on to performers in our next module and our next chapter. We'll see you then.